welcome to our 5th edition of the REIMAGINE 2020 virtual conference series, brought to you by MouseBelt Blockchain Accelerator and Multi.io. I'm your co-host, Ashlie Meredith, and today we're bringing you our end-of-year special Happy Hodl Days. We're delighted to have Steve Albonico here with us today. He's the Blockchain Operations Architect at Boeing. Hi, Steve. How are you doing today?
Hi, Ashley. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great.
Well, thanks for joining us. For anyone who's just tuning in or has missed some of our previous conferences, Steve is a returning guest. He joined for our first conference back in May. So be sure to head over to our REIMAGINE 2020 YouTube channel, smash that subscribe button, check out all of our other interviews with industry leaders who are both working directly, in the blockchain industry and for blockchain protocols, but also bringing blockchain into enterprise companies like Boeing. So really excited to dive in and get some updates since it's been about 6 months since we talked to you. But first, for me, I'm the head of education over at MouseBelt, and we have a university program. So we engage with students from 100 different universities all over the world, and they're all really excited about this technology. They're all looking to make the jump to decide if they want to pursue this as a career. So I like to kind of speak to the students directly about what your experience was getting into blockchain, and with students in mind, kind of speaking to them what any of your advice might be for students who are thinking about getting into the blockchain industry.
Yeah, totally. I think the first piece of advice is build stuff. Go out there and build things and find some friends and build things with them. The number one way you're going to impress people, the number one way you're going to really impress yourself, and you're going to build that confidence that's going to give you that interview edge, is by doing stuff and doing it badly at first and then doing it slightly better after that. That's a huge piece. That's actually how I kind of got involved into blockchain, into everything really, but into blockchain. I just read a lot of the docs, watched a lot of the videos. Actually, some of the best videos were from UC Berkeley. The students over there put on some great blockchain trainers a couple of years ago. And I just started building things that I thought would really work. For my case, it was a court system blockchain that I built. But even though it wasn't super great, and especially as I've grown as a member of the industry, I've realized that, okay, I made a lot of mistakes and it was severely unsecure when I first built it. I learned so much more that when I started going into interviews, started to talk with other industry leaders, I could have the conversation because I could understand what they were saying, and I could bring meaningful feedback when they would ask questions or say things or whatever else. And it's just a great way to break the ice. It's a great way to answer any questions thrown at you. And it's really helpful when you actually get into your career and you're sitting at that desk looking at, what am I going to do next? How am I going to solve this problem? Already having done a few things and also having done them in that lower pressure environment of, I'm just going to try stuff. That's really a huge building block to your career. And I would say, if you're looking at blockchain, that's also really awesome because it's such a friendly environment now. There's a lot of people out there who are really willing to help. So, look on LinkedIn, find some people that are doing that job you want to be doing. Reach out to them. We're friendly. We are more than happy to talk about some of the things we're doing. Take a look at some of the stuff you're doing, or maybe give you a couple ideas about, okay, well, if you're into this and you want to build something like this, maybe take a look at this language. But just do it. Worst case scenario, you just don't get accepted on LinkedIn by a certain person. But I guarantee you're going to get a few people that are more than happy to reach out and talk to you and help you kind of grow your career. So I think that would be the advice there.
Yeah, well, I love that you were so honest there, right? Do something, even if you're bad at it at first. There's not really any other way to get better at something. So don't be afraid to make some mistakes along the way. And it's also encouraging to hear that you were seeking out that content that these students have been producing, because this is such an emerging industry. And in my experience, a lot of the initiatives at universities are driven by students. There's not enough experts in the field yet. The students are the experts, and they're the ones actually teaching some of these student facilitated courses. And it sounds like you were able to benefit from the stuff that's coming out of UC Berkeley, and there's just so much out there for people to find. And I definitely also have to encourage students to go over to MouseBelt University and sign up for some of our online courses, all free. Join our Telegram group, meet other students who are working on these projects. I'm curious about your first project, though. It was the court system. Maybe I think students would like to hear how how you were inspired to actually build something at first and how you went about it.
Yeah, sure. So in my previous life, I ran a 911 technology for a police and fire department for 10 years. And one of the things that we ran into was the silos of data. And what that really means is you would think, because you watch a lot of TV, that all sorts of different police departments would have one central system that they could just cross-check everything and do all the cool stuff. It's just like any other company you run into. There are certain places that work really well together. There are certain silos of information that are really hard to get. And specifically, there's a lot of problems when it comes to freshness of data, status of data, that kind of stuff. One court could possibly make a decree or create a document. That document would need to be worked with by multiple other agencies. And one agency may not necessarily know what another agency was doing with that document, or they may have an older version, or they may do the same thing with the same document. You can imagine that's kind of an issue. And that's really not just public safety. It's really most industries that are large, supply chain being one of them as well. So the question was, what technologies are out there that could make this better? I mean, there's the traditional idea of, creating APIs between different databases and whatever else, having intermediary groups. There's a lot of intermediary groups. But the question really came is, why couldn't we do it ourselves? Why couldn't we use some sort of technology where we control the security of it, where we controlled everything up and down, but not one of us was in control. All of us were in control. How can we decentralize something that's so severely centralized and still needs to have some sort of centralization to it, right? So on one end of the blockchain spectrum, you have the idea of decentralize everything. No one's in charge, absolutely nothing. And that's awesome. That works really well for a lot of different things, like currency. But on the other end of the spectrum, you still want to have that maybe a little bit of a, okay, well, you have things that prove who you are, kind of almost the opposite here. Like you specifically are who you are based on certificates, based on intermediary CAs, things like that. And so we started looking into it, and lo and behold, blockchain was really starting to kind of grow in the enterprise industry, or I did, looking into it. And more specifically, there was a couple of different solutions, but the one that I kind of found was one known as Hyperledger Fabric. The Linux Foundation is the main keeper of that, but it is open source. And so first thing I did was, of course, just take a look at how does Bitcoin work, because that was the only real idea I had of blockchain at the beginning was, well, okay, I know that Bitcoin is decentralized somehow, but it still manages to keep security going. So how does that work? You dive deeper and deeper, you learn about proof of work, proof of stake, all sorts of the different pieces to it, and you start wondering, okay, well, these are really cool, but how can these work for what I want to do? And then you find something like a Hyperledger Fabric or whatever other language that seems to fit your needs. And at that point, you can read a couple docs, you can watch some YouTube, you can go to a couple different places, but that just kind of gets you just enough to break stuff, which is where you really want to be. That's where the fun is when you have just enough of an idea and just enough of a room to go out there and get something working and then look at it. And so that's basically what I did. Was I went and I took a look, and I actually went taking a look to see if anyone else had talked about this or were working on this problem. And there actually was a industry group that had a blockchain group. A lot of people who weren't necessarily technical, but they had a good idea about what they thought the blockchain could do. So I took a look at their white paper, basically, and I said to myself, I'm going to build it and show it to them and see what they think. And so that's actually what I did. Is I went ahead and I built it, not well, using Hyperledger Fabric, kind of bubblegummed it together, threw it up on Amazon Web Services in a little Kubernetes cluster. And that in and of itself seems very simple to say, but actually learning Kubernetes, learning Amazon Web Services to an extent that you can handle that, learning Hyperledger Fabric, learning certificates, PKI, all those different pieces that you have to kind of figure out just to get something that kind of maybe works. And then on top of that, a middleware so that a UI can work with it. So at this point, that's a broad spectrum of different things that there's no way you're going to be an expert at any of these things going up. I had 10 years in the industry, not necessarily development, but administration, technology, whatever else. And I was bad at many different technologies at this, but I learned enough to be serviceable in building this piece of work that is a proof of concept. And, you know, we took it forward. They actually were like, hey, this is great. Let us show this to some other people. And it gained a little traction, and I got to kind of show it off and talk about it. And that really built that confidence. And from there on, it was like, all right, so I've built something badly on my own. Now, how do I get somewhere where I can be with experts who know how to build things well, who have large scale use cases where we can work on scaling, where we can kind of get that information and that work really tightened down. And you find Boeing, or you find whoever would be the big area. And the goal is to try and get in that room with people who have done it before, who are very knowledgeable, or who can give you that kind of that poke to say, yeah, do this now, or what if you try this piece, or how are we going to make this thing scale, that kind of stuff. And that's the hard part, but it's also the fun part, because that's where you slowly but surely kind of gain that insight into, all right, so if this works with 3 users, how do we make it work with 4,000 users? You know, if we use self-signed certificates, how do we use DigiCert signed certificates? How do we use certificates that are trusted by one group but not trusted by another? Things like that. How do you really build out a very mature environment? And so that's kind of your growth path a little bit. And it doesn't necessarily need to be Hyperledger Fabric or court systems or anything else. It could literally be whatever it is that you want to find a solution to. Use that to help you on your journey, and build those skills of critical thinking, of building out what a project needs to have for it to be sellable. So the other piece that I think I kind of ran into was, okay, yeah, I can build Hyperledger Fabric with a couple nodes, and they can talk to each other in Amazon, and I can send, you know, command line commands to them. But no one cares. Like, no one wants to see me just send command lines. I can't walk into a room with a bunch of people who work in the in a industry that's not coding and show them that. They'll be like, oh, that's cool. It's command line. So you have to think to yourself, okay, well, what can I do that I can also build a UI with skills I have? Or what can I do that I can also show off these things? How do I build this so that I'm showing off just enough, but it's not going to take me 6 years to build everything, right? That kind of stuff. And that's, I mean, that is a one-to-one scale to project management in any industry of what do we want to accomplish? What can we actually accomplish? And how can we find that medium in the middle of those two things that actually is the best possible outcome between what we would love to do and what we can actually do in the time we're given in the different things that just come up.
Yeah, that's such a great example, kind of case study for any student who is interested in maybe kind of getting into the blockchain space, because it sounds like you took something that you were already kind of working on, where you saw maybe blockchain can apply here, you know, went through all the steps of what it takes to build something, got that experience of, you know, how do I integrate with Amazon? How do I do all these other things? How do I show this to people? Do I need to build a UI for it? And got those project management skills. And then that gave you enough background in blockchain to be able to move on to now you're, you know, blockchain architect at Boeing.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And the blockchain industry is so young, and there's so many people who are just now starting to kind of get rolling in it, that it is a very special place, I think, right now, where people can start from zero and really build quickly and really start to kind of find new and interesting ways to use blockchain, to find their little niche within blockchain. What can I do to blockchain that's different than everyone else is doing, that can make me kind of a little expert, that can have people come and ask me about certain things? In my personal place, it's kind of the administration, the operations kind of piece of it. I work a lot in building out infrastructures that make it more easy for administrators to run and check up on and change and do what they need to do within a blockchain network, right? A lot of the command tools that are out there, there's a lot of different options when it comes to blockchain. There's a lot of companies doing a lot of great work building out tools to make it quick or easy. Well, quick and easy is relative, of course, in our industry, but making it less complicated to get up and running with these tools. And those are along the kind of the same lines of what I'm doing. Mine a little bit more specific to some of what we're doing. But that's just because I've had 10 years prior of mostly being an administrator or running programs or trying to sell the idea of programs to upper management or whatever else. That's just kind of where I meander to. And it's just kind of where we kind of get to. It doesn't mean we're not building stuff. I still get to build stuff, which is fun. But it's not your typical, I'm not building blockchain necessarily, or doing a lot of chain code or work like that. And that's also the fun part about this industry, is you're going to go in there thinking, I'm going to build this one specific stack, or I'm going to build these one thing, and the next thing you know, you're doing DevOps, or the next thing you know, you're working on some language you've never heard of, or somebody walks up to you and be like, hey, you want to learn CTRAN, which is an ancient language that is used a whole lot, I think. But that's another kind of, I think, something to take with you, is try to get excited about challenges, because there's going to be challenges. You're never going to walk into a space where you're going to get what you expect, especially in technology. You're going to walk in and someone's going to be like, well, this doesn't work and it needs to work like yesterday. Can you fix it? Or I need you to help me do this, or I need you to take this task off my plate, or whatever else. And you may have some sort of idea. Hopefully you have some sort of idea, but it's still going to be a challenge to you nonetheless. It's never going to be specifically what you're used to. And you have a tendency your first couple times around to kind of deer in the headlights and go, oh God, I don't know what any of this is. I'm just gonna, and you're gonna think to yourself, oh man, what do I do? You read docs and you start making it work, and you gain that confidence, those experience points, to really kind of level up to, yeah, now I can do this. Now I can analyze any problem thrown my way. And obviously, best case scenario, your schooling and your education has gotten you to a place where you already have some set of competences, but you just never know till you're out there really working on a problem. And sometimes there's problems that there is no Googling that can help you. Sometimes you just have to work through it till you figure it out. Although Stack Overflow pretty much knows everything, but even in blockchain, there's a lot of newer stuff where you're not going to be able to kind of lean on, somebody must have run into this problem. And don't be afraid of that. Be excited about that, because if you can solve that, that now makes you the expert in that field. And that's true of any field really in technology, but I think that's another good piece of advice to take along with you, is expect challenge, be excited by it. When you overcome it, it's going to be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. Before we move on to what you do specifically at Boeing, or how the year has been for the company, I want to get a little more of your perspective. I think it was just so interesting that you said you worked in this field, and you would think that access to data, that any court can open any file. And I just remember, it reminded me of my experience. One of my first jobs when I was 18 years old was in public health. And so it was this kind of realization that I was an adult now, and the world was not like this perfectly oiled machine. It was literally, it's just people in a room with file cabinets, and and things get lost. And like, that was just like a real big wake up call. Cause I think when you're a kid, you think, that adults always know what they're doing, or that we have these really perfect systems. And it was just like really interesting to be like, oh no, it's just, Jan over there with her file cabinet. And
it's totally true. The world runs on Jan over there by the file cabinet. Like, it really does. And that's any industry. Like, there are some Jans that are better at what they do than other Jans, and some Jans need to learn. But like you're saying, it's absolutely true. And public safety even more so, and the government even more so, because I think you have to really love it to stick it out in that industry. And I still love working with people, because 90% of the people you're going to walk into in the public safety industry and in the industry of government itself actually just want to help people. And that's the thing you have to keep remembering to yourself, is we're trying to solve for equations that don't have great answers all the time. And specifically when it comes to records that really matter, records that say, someone's safety is on the line based on these things being enforced, or someone has been wrongly punished for something, or all these different records are very important. And in every system, records are generally very important, but in this system, they're very, very important. And there is a lot to do with it. And I think one of the things for me as a technology person in the government field was I'm always striving, and it really, really made me want to try and do things better. Try to find that next step that can help solve to make things work better for the next person in line. And it's not something that you're ever going to solve, right? You're not going to solve perfect government. You're not going to solve pretty much anything perfectly, right? Everything is going to be it's a marathon, not necessarily. There's no answer. There's no um, silver bullet. I don't know. That's a bad term. Yeah, so it's a weird term. But you're never going to find that perfect. And it's always going to be trying to do things a little bit better. And that, in a lot of ways, is how blockchain is to me. Is that you can do a lot of things in blockchain using other technologies than blockchain, but you can do them quite a bit better and quite a bit more efficiently in their lanes, in government, in supply chain, in the medical field, things like that. And I think kind of what you're talking about, we can let Jan maybe take a break from having to be the arbiter of all records. And trust me, even in public safety, we definitely had a person who was the person who pretty much knew where all the old records were, or they knew where all the specific things were. And what blockchain could allow you to do in this regard is you can have a ledger that everyone shares that can be that Jan, that can be the thing that everyone refers to, whether it be this department, whether it be this court system, whether it be this person out on the street or lawyer or whatever else. And that's kind of where we're trying to get to, is how can we make that secure and also timely and also really usable, really, really trustable. And that's kind of across all the industries that I've worked, it's trying to build trust in a space where you don't have one central authority. How do you get all these different places to talk together? If you've ever gotten a parking ticket on a road trip, you realize that if you get a parking ticket in Oregon, but you're from California and you're now hanging out in Washington, you may never know you got that parking ticket if the ticket fell off your car until you go to register your car. And the DMV or whoever you go to says, you have outstanding tickets on your car. You might want to get those fixed. It's one of those things, right? Like you'd think, well, shouldn't there just be some central clearinghouse where we could just go and check on all the tickets for my car, right? One would think. That's the idea, but these are different states. Each state has their own systems. There are some intermediary systems, and that's true of most places. Even many large companies within them are actually an amalgamation of lots of smaller companies that maybe came together for different reasons and are still kind of dealing with that idea of not one centralized database, or an old database and a new database that didn't quite get migrated as well as we had hoped. That's also another place where you can start to kind of take pieces of that infrastructure and put them, not the whole thing, but pieces of them onto a ledger where you can at least get that trustable source between different pieces. What is the status of this given record? Is there a hash of this record so I know that I have the latest perfect version of it, or can I trust this? And that's really the long way of answering your question, to say that the ledger can build the trust in the places where traditionally you had one central Jan to tell you these things.
Yeah, I just came to my mind because I know you talked a lot about data in your last interview. So anyone just tuning in, if you want to hear more about Steve's thoughts on this. So, you know, I was just, you already kind of touched on your beliefs about blockchain or what you think the best use cases are. But yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts about, you know, it sounds like you're very passionate about these silos of information. And
it's a weird thing to be passionate about, but here we are.
But yeah, I mean, I can see it because I have experience, you know, as well, working in public health, and especially with COVID and having so many friends who still work in public health, just seeing how these silos of information become deadly. So I think it's great. And maybe, yeah, maybe this kind of can bring us into talking about your role at Boeing. Is that the kind of use case that Boeing is looking into? Like, I think obviously people would think supply chain management, but are there other like data applications of blockchain that they are implementing?
Well, you know, in a general sense, the supply chain is really pretty much just like data silos. There's any given supply chain that you're going to work with, you're going to have a number of different people handling one thing or many things as they transit around the world or wherever they need to be. And along those routes, there's a lot of checks and balances that have to occur, right? So any given piece of information that can symbolize something in transit can start in one database or silo, move to another one, transit through a number of different agencies that may be putting some sort of auditing on it, building trails, things like that. And that's kind of the same idea of what we were talking about earlier, right? Of the idea of, how do I know whether this car has a ticket on it or where this document from court is going? It's the same idea really in a large scale supply chain organization. Is how do I know that this part is where it said it's coming from? How do I know that it is legitimate? How do I know it's had all the services, whatever else on it, right? How do we establish that it is where it said it was from? How do we establish that it is good and that it is, the status of it is current? And for Boeing in general, that is the goal. Is Boeing has a huge amount of different parts moving around at any given time. They have a huge amount of different things that they're responsible for. And how can we take blockchain and ease that information transit between different places? Some of them may be very different, very far away geographically. How do we bring those together quickly? How do we make sure these different systems that were all built at different times and all have different logins, have different administrators, have different pieces of it? We don't need to smash all this stuff together, but we do need to keep some sort of oracle or trust amongst all the different parties. And that's really kind of the same idea that you're going to see probably in healthcare as well, right? You have insurance brokers, you have hospitals, you have other people, providers, whatever else, right? They don't necessarily need to smash all their systems together or any of that kind of stuff, or even really have logins across these different systems. But if they have some central place that no one particularly owns, but everyone has access to see, that solves a big problem. And in the healthcare industry and public safety, you're talking about hopefully helping people's lives be better, or even saving lives to be at the best case of it. But also efficiency is the number one thing in industry that makes you money. If things are just that much quicker, if things are just that much more efficient, if things work just that much more quick across a large scale operation, when everything is like, a tenth of a cent better, times that by 1 billion times, got a lot of money. It's industries of scale, and that's really where blockchain can shine. That's really where a lot of these little small changes to make things just move a little smoother really can pay off in money saved and even money earned after a while. And so it's blockchain is one of those cool little pieces of IT where you can actually go up to your manager and say, yeah, it's actually going to make you a little bit of money, or it's definitely going to bring more money in than it's going to cost you to make it. And for anyone who's ever worked in IT administration, you look at that and you're like, that's not normal. Usually it's how much do I have to pay to make this thing work, right? And what do we have to do to make sure that we're doing this to standard and that we're doing it securely? And so that's kind of a general overview of really how we try to get blockchain to make things better at Boeing.
Well, that's so interesting because do you think that in general, enterprises do see blockchain as ultimately money saving or money generating? Because I feel like there's some maybe people who are maybe behind the curve think about the cost of implementing such a system and don't really see the benefit, or maybe it's a matter of scale that any company of a certain size, it's going to obviously be a benefit. What do you think the trends are, or if everyone is thinking ahead like Boeing is?
So I think that's a great question, and it's kind of got a couple different views to it, right? So I'm biased, right? So of course I'm going to think all the companies I work with love blockchain because I work with companies that like blockchain, or else I wouldn't be around them. But I think the thing about blockchain is it is a cross organization technology. Generally, organizations don't implement on their own. You see groups come together. Hedera is a kind of a good sample of that. Is that one of the things they work on the most is to get as many companies partnered in there as well as the ecosystem. It's a larger ecosystem. And so if one of the companies in your industry or in your environment thinks that they can do something better or more efficiently using a new technology and they start to implement it and you don't, you have to ask yourself the question, what are they seeing that I'm not? And you really have two real choices that you can make in this situation. And it really comes down to exactly the situation each individual organization is in. So it's really hard to say whether or not someone's behind the curve on something like this, or if it's more of a smart move that they can afford to stand back and see how things work out and then decide based on more information. Because once again, we are in still a very young industry, especially on the enterprise side of it. I think the finance side of blockchain has actually been around quite a bit relatively longer than enterprise really honestly had the adoption path that you're seeing with it. And so I think some companies see this and go, man, if we can get this up and running and we can be this much more efficient and we can get all of our partners involved in this and we can kind of lead the way with it, that kind of top to bottom efficiency that builds in, even if it's slow, even if it's literally just making it so that we can automate a little bit of IoT here and automate a little bit of IoT there based on the chain, that's still savings that we're seeing that we can pass on, that can make us more competitive in a given market. And so there is definitely a person who gets there first getting a reward. There's a smoother way of saying that, but it doesn't.
First mover advantage or something.
There it is. Yeah, totally. And I think that you're starting to see that happen more and more. You're starting to see more companies across different supply chains, across different healthcare industries, whatever else, take a look and say, well, I think that my competitors are doing this, and if I'm not doing it, that may put me at a disadvantage, or it may make it so that I'm missing out on something better. Now, maybe I'll be able to make up the ground faster because there's a lot of companies that are running into a bunch of blockades that they have to figure out and spend the time and money to figure out. And then once they figure it all out, because we really do run more of a decentralized culture in blockchain, a lot of the tools that we use are still pretty open source. So while there is some secret sauces here and there that are being used, for the most part, if someone's able to crack a hard question, you're going to see that be rolled back into the main languages, Hyperledger Fabric being a big one of it, right? You're going to see some of that come up, and you're also going to see a lot of, I guess you call it a cottage industry of companies, startups or bigger, that are building tool sets that already can kind of hold a hand through it. Blockchain is still complicated and technical enough that you can't just kind of point and click and have blockchain. I mean, you could, but you would still want to kind of go through all of the pieces to it. But as the industry matures, there's going to be less and less output that a company's going to have to use to get what they need. So you're kind of seeing a little back and forth of first movers advantage. Is that what you called it? Versus, not spending as much, but still possibly getting as good of a product in the end. And that kind of a back and forth pull, I think, is definitely what you're seeing right now in this industry. Is you're seeing some companies take the initiative. You're seeing some companies perk up and watch what's going on, but not necessarily be ready to jump in at the moment.
Yeah, so maybe some of these enterprise companies are waiting until there are these much smoother kind of software as service options where they'll be able to quickly and easily integrate blockchain once it's been tested a little bit more.
Totally.
Well, so then going back to Boeing specifically, since it's the end of the year, we're headed to the holidays, perfect time to kind of do a year-end review. What's something that you think was a highlight for Boeing as a company, maybe just in general, and then what you see in specifically the blockchain departments and the things that you are working on?
So I think so Boeing has been in a place where it's just been a very hard year for Boeing in general. Pandemic has been very bad for Boeing. Lots of different things have been hard for Boeing. But one of the things I'm most proud about is that I'm still here talking about the cool stuff that we're doing at Boeing. That really speaks to me to how great it is that a company does trust in its technology. It does trust in looking forward and allowing people like myself and the amazing team at Boeing to keep trying and working on great stuff and really keep the faith. It's hard for a company that's very large that is going through, even a small company in an environment like this, to stay on the path to doing things that are innovative, that are really future forward, and especially in industries like blockchain that are so young and new. So I think for me that is, and I hope, and I truly think that that's really going to work out very well for Boeing and specifically, but in general in the industry itself. So I think that the first answer to the question is that it's been really great to see that the growth is still occurring, even in probably the hardest possible conditions it could be in this industry. Moving forward as a general piece to the industry as a whole, you can't really talk about this year without talking about the pandemic and how that has really just changed everything. It has been, it is a tragedy. It really is. It's hard to say, but there's these good things that come out of such a huge tragedy. So many people's lives have been altered for the worse. To say that it is good that I think we are starting to see the effects, that we are now more willing to accept decentralized thinking in general. So the whole work from home movement, the whole idea of, not everything has to be centralized at a given location, that we can actually have Zoom meetings and actually get things done in them, and that there was a learning curve, but we had to do it. It's almost in kind of a funny way, a lot of the groups that I've worked with were never really in one geolocation. Most teams that I've worked with generally have offices or teams that are spread out across countries or the world. And so for me, at least, it's been some of the nice parts of this is, with everyone working from home, especially balancing kids, life, dogs, cats, all the different things, you actually start to kind of get to know people on a different level. You hear one of your teammates' kid, every 7 a.m. in a 7 a.m. meeting. You always get to hear him in the back playing on toys or whatever else, because you're like, oh, hey, it's so-and-so's kid. Or, one of them accidentally bursts in the room and says something, and you hear him, gently explain what a blockchain is to a 6-year-old. I mean, there are a lot of fun parts to it. It is adorable. I hope that, for a lot of our teams, that you're embracing the idea that, like, stuff isn't perfect, especially when you're trying to work from home. And sometimes the dog's going to come in and he's just going to, like, knock something over, or he's going to bark at the mailman, or your kid's going to come in and just need to have an attention moment or something like that. And that it's okay. We can still be highly productive. We can still do things decentralized. We can still get just as much work done, if not more. And it doesn't have to have this centralized notion to it. And I think to kind of try and tie something like that back to blockchain is, that's kind of the idea with blockchain, is you don't necessarily have to have everything stored in one central location to consider it perfect, or to have it secure, or whatever else. That you can break up a ledger, that you can secure a ledger and have multiple people have multiple levels of security that is enforced by others on the network. That you can have these ideas of decentralized ledgers really throughout your work environment. And I think in the startup game, in the blockchain industry, you're already kind of seeing that kind of be the standard operating practice, is that we build decentralized things. Our team is decentralized. That's just how we roll. And that our current environment seems to kind of, now that's just pretty much anybody in an environment. Now you're going to see that kind of come back a little bit. I think you're seeing a lot of regulations get kind of relaxed, especially in the financial industry. Temporarily, I'm going to guess that we're probably going to see many people have to go back into secured locations and things like that to work, as we do hopefully get to more of a sense of normal in the coming year.
Yeah. Oh, my dad works for the Department of Energy, so they don't log into computers from their home.
Right.
There has to be someone going into an actual physical location for the kind of security that they're dealing with. But yeah.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I don't think you can really, I think there's specific things that you have to do from the office, unfortunately, but I think we're going to hopefully see that many things we don't necessarily have to do all the time from the office.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how, kind of touched on how COVID-19 has affected Boeing this year. Any other, insights? I mean, the last time we talked to you was right when shutdowns were happening. So any other just kind of reflections on how Boeing handled it, and how you and your employees have been feeling, and how they dealt with it.
It's interesting, right? So for me, the lockdown and the pandemic hit specifically the same time I moved states. I actually started in California. I decided to move to Washington. I moved to Washington. I was here for maybe 3 months, and then everything just locked down. And it was definitely from a personal standpoint, it's hard when you're trying to set new roots in a community. to get back to actually one of the things you asked earlier, and I have a new idea for that. You asked earlier what's another kind of advice to give students is get involved in your local meetups and whatever else, although pause right now because pandemic, but post-pandemic, hopefully sooner than later, one of the most important things I did was getting involved in meetups and different industry meet and greets and talks and things like that in person. Now, once again, safety first, but there is so much that comes from meeting your community. Even if you already have a stable job or you're lucky or you're still just kind of a student moving through it, meet the people in the industry, talk to them, sit next to them at these conferences, ask them a question or two. That kind of stuff is really important to kind of build an idea about how your industry is moving. And I think for me, I was here for about maybe a month and a half worth of meetups. So I think I got like 3 of them. But in those 3, meetups, I was able to really meet a lot of people. And I was able to start to understand and have industry contacts. And there's no better sense of community that you can have than starting to meet people who are in the same idea group as you are. And that goes for technology, that goes for languages, that goes for what you do for fun. Personally, 49er fans that live up in Seattle, there are some of us. That kind of stuff is very important. And that is one of the effects that I've definitely seen is it teams like MouseBelt have been doing an amazing job trying to build online communities in these times. And these things are very important for us to keep meeting each other, for us to keep having these conversations and keeping each other updated. And until we can go back to doing this in person, keep doing stuff like this, keep going to watching these MouseBelt industry events and grow from those. And I think that has been one of the things I've seen change the most is it's really been great to see people like yourself make a hard turn and say, you know what, we're going to build the same community online. And that's been really cool. And so I think that's really seeing the industry kind of pivot and still keep all that momentum going, I think has been a real positive and a really something cool to see happen even in the last year or so.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had the same experience moving to Denver last December and, just barely starting to get into the meetup scene before the lockdowns happened. But they had a co-working space here that did a free co-working space day if you worked in the blockchain industry, or if you just came in and said, like, I'm here to work on, because I work in blockchain, and I immediately got plugged into the ETH community because they do ETH Denver here. I volunteered at the conference, and definitely always encourage students to just, put themselves out there. If you don't have a club at your school, start one. For non-technical people who maybe aren't going to like build a blockchain application, your advice earlier in the interview about, build something, even if it's bad at first, build a community. Most of all of the founders that of these blockchain clubs, now that I've been doing this almost 3 years, are starting to graduate and actually get jobs in the space. Because they, put themselves out there and they created something. And yes, go to your local meetups, meet the local community in your space. And in the meantime, head over to MouseBelt University, join our social groups online. And I've loved doing these interviews because like people like yourself return and we get to hear their updates and kind of get from a student in Ghana to a billionaire who just bought into Bitcoin. We're getting these perspectives and to really understand where this space is going. So speaking to that, I'd love to hear what, some of Boing's blockchain plans are for next year, what you envision the role of blockchain for the future, maybe some trends outside of Boing as well that you think we'll see for 2021.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think 2020 was the year that actual production blockchain became normal, that you started seeing in the industry as a whole, you're seeing different groups say, yeah, we have enterprise blockchain running at scale. You see it, you're seeing it more and more. So now that we're starting to see, 2019 was proof of concepts. 2020 was getting things to run at momentum. 2021, now you're going to start seeing, okay, well, now what can we do? I think I said it a little earlier in the last in March, but I still believe this to be true. Is I think that there's a huge piece to the idea of identity, And I think there is a big deal getting to distributed identity. And not to kind of run over the same idea multiple times, but that's something that I think is going to cross over a lot of different industries, is the idea that you can start using the identity that you're provided from your work, from your school, from your medical provider, from your library. And you can use those different identities to start making things more smoother in your own life. You don't necessarily just have to use your driver's license for everything, or whatever other piece of identification material you have. You can start using your phone to tap, and that phone can actually say, hey, you know what? I have this thing from my working location. So let's say you work for, like, I don't know, an Apple or a Google, and one of those trusted identity, they're a trusted identity provider, right? So they've made sure that you are who you say you are, that you're over 21 or whatever else, right? You can go ahead and use that in different arenas, and you can keep that secure. You don't have to tell someone all of your information or even your last name, but you can at least prove that, I work for Google and they say I'm over 21, or the DMV says that I live in California or Washington or whatever else. And I think moving forward, kind of one of the most exciting things I heard was that, and I don't know how far along they are, but it's so exciting to me, is that the post office is looking into the idea of figuring out how to start really using blockchain to enhance what they're going to be using with moving the idea of voting, moving votes and things like that. And I think it's very early times, but that is going to really, I think, combine with the idea of identity and distributed identity, and being able to really control your own identity on the internet and in the real world as well, into something that really can kind of show the power of having that. So, if you want to say, okay, well, in order for you to be able to vote, you need to have an identity from any of these different identity providers. We just say which ones we trust, and it's no longer, you have to get one or two different types of cards or whatever else. And there's this whole prolonged idea of signatures and everything else that could really honestly be solved. That's a real big problem that has an application I think that blockchain could actually solve, and not just in the traditional ledger idea. The idea of decentralized identity and data management as a whole is something super exciting. So baby steps, of course, but I think going forward, you're going to start seeing more and more people saying, okay, well, now we have these great giant enterprise blockchains. What are we going to do with them? How are we going to combine them? You could see someone I used to work with used to call it the "you got your peanut butter and my chocolate" moment, which is, you would never think of two industries bumping into each other and realizing that, well, if we both trust this one ledger, maybe we could trust each other to do, I don't know what it is. Maybe you could work at one, maybe if you work at a hot topic and all of a sudden they need staff at some other place, you could just go work and just clock in over there. Maybe if they combine, they don't have to combine their databases or smashing that together, but if they have any ledger that has any kind of combined identity provider to it, and they can make their systems work with that, you have built-in federation. And that is really going to show up, I think, in the community as a whole, where you're going to get the people who don't necessarily know or care that it's blockchain getting value from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think digital identity was going to be huge, especially like, why should I have to, like, if someone has already verified my identity for some purpose, why should I have to do it over and over and over again? If there is some background checks, right? It's a multi-million-dollar industry just to prove my employment history. Like, as a educator and someone interested in ed tech, like, I'm always interested in being able to own like your own learning experiences, and how you're having to like prove that you are who you say you are, or you did the things that you said you did over and over again. Would be great if that was more streamlined. And of course, like the voting, proving your identity to be able to cast a vote, like, should not be based on whether, like, did I, like, I'm nervous I cast my ballot by mail, but like nervous that I didn't sign my own signature close enough. Like, I don't know. I've had this before because I think I was doing a money order in a foreign country, and they require a matching signature. And I had to do it like 3 times because my signature wasn't matching my signature. It's my signature, like obviously it's possible to not do it perfectly, right? So yeah, that's going to be such a relief when we have a better way of proving we are who we say we are, not having to carry sensitive documents around all the time, being able to use them for a lot of different kinds of things like voting, employment. So I think that's going to be the future.
Yeah, there's the fun things, but you also look forward and you see, I think you see the idea that authenticity is going to become bigger and bigger deal in society in general, especially with the idea of deep fakes and other things happening. The idea to create your own personal ledger where you can put a hash up on that ledger of a document that is real and that is true. If I have a picture or a document that I've created, I can put a hash up on maybe a personal ledger or something like that with my identity and my signature. And it can be verified that that is true and honestly yours, or that, nope, it used to be this, but that hash is way different now. So I think that idea of decentralized authenticity that kind of folds in that we were just talking about with identity is not only going to be a neat and nice to have kind of a thing, but it may actually become something that is going to be a must have, I think, longer term, 3, 4, 5 years moving forward, as you see that kind of take off, the more technologies that can make things a little bit more inauthentic. How do we handle that? How do we work together to make sure that we can keep the authenticity, but not have to give up privacy along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us your perspectives on this year, 2020, things that are going on at Boeing. Before I let you go, just to keep with the holiday theme, wanted to hear something that brought you joy this year.
Okay, well, it's been really great that I've been able to spend so much more time with my family. Like, just not having to commute, just being able to, between meetings, go over and just hug the dog or say hi to the wife or say hi to the neighbor, or all these different things has been a joy that I never knew I was missing out on. Just the little things, the little things of just having an inside joke with your coworker who's also your wife, who's also, living with you. Like, it's really fun to be able, and you know what, I know her coworkers and she's getting to know my coworkers, and it just, there's something really nice about that you didn't really know you didn't have till you start having it. And it's brought me a lot of joy. And it's actually something that I'm kind of hoping I get to keep and hold on to, and it's just a really nice little surprise with all of the kind of the bad news that there's these little nice things going on. So yeah, that brought me
absolutely
joy.
Well, that was going to be my next question. What are you hoping for 2021? Maybe for blockchain or Boeing or even personally?
I think moving forward, hopefully this is a positive thing, but I want things to just keep going. I think that not the pandemic, I would like that to stop as soon as possible, but everything else, I think the positives that we've started to see in the blockchain industry, the momentum we're seeing, there's so many
Bitcoin keep going up.
Yeah, smart and motivated people. And what's cool is we keep bumping into new and more interesting people. And I hope to see this industry swell even more. I think we're getting a lot more interesting. I think a couple of years ago, you asked someone what they want to do out of college, it was AI. It was machine learning. It was AI. Almost always everybody wanted to do that. And it was just so hot right now. But now we're moving forward, and it's still AI ML. It's totally still what most people will say. But you're getting the blockchain coming up every now and then. You're getting people being like, yeah, I actually kind of want to get into distributed ledger. I want to see that more and more. I want to get more people excited about it. Maybe not necessarily as excited about data silos as I am, but maybe in ledgers as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have to say that I'm hopeful for the same. And from seeing it from the student side of things, just seeing how motivated they are and how many of them are saying that they do want to enter this industry, I think it's upwards and onwards for 2021. Well, thank you again, Stephen, for joining us, and everyone just tuning in. This is Reimagine 2020 version 5. Happy HODL days, and we'll be back with more.